Russ, we have been friends for over a decade, and we met backstage at a System of a Down concert. Shout out John Dalman.
I still remember that like it was yesterday, and I've got photos of holding the backstage pass, and I remember our mutual friend John Hill gave me a call. He's like, "Hey dude, you like System of a Down?" I'm like, "Of course I like System. They're awesome. They're getting back together. They're touring. You want to go to a show?" Of course I do. Well, I got tickets. I kind of know the guy who's the drummer. I'm like, "Okay, John. Yeah, I get it. Let's go see System." So I didn't know who I was going to be meeting there. I didn't know I would be meeting you or your dad, but I do know that I had been selling and buying comics from John Hill for a couple years by that point in time. So it was, absolutely happy coincidence that you guys happened to be there.
Yeah, I consider John family, like we have the comic fam, and then we have like the inner comic fam circle of like the people I grew up with. And then we have like Comic Pops, who's my literal dad, right? So John Hill is part of the inner comic fam. He was the dealer that my dad sold comics with when I was like 11, 12, 13 years old. So I've been friends with John Hill. I consider him an uncle this entire time. And because he is a major dealer in the Pacific Northwest, has one of the biggest shops in Washington, he's been friends with John Dalman, who's the owner of Torpedo Comics, one of the largest comic stores in the world, right? So I was so hyped to find out that I got an invite to go see System of a Down because John had some extra tickets. And when I was introduced to you, it was really fun because John saw a networking opportunity between us. He knew that I was getting really into comics in my early 20s. And he also knew my dad used to be into comics. Maybe he would come back, and foreshadowing, he would. And now he buys from both you and John, which is really funny.
Right.
Full circle. But when he introduced me to you, he said, Russ sells a lot of comics as well. And he may even travel to you to get you the books you need. Like you were a damn drug dealer.
Right.
And legit, it was kind of like you were.
Well, meeting John Hill was a great experience, and the fact that I was buying comics out of his garage, I was looking to sell bulk. I mean,
this is when John had a garage.
This is back when John had a garage.
Before the store and everything.
Right.
Oh my gosh, so funny.
I was able to go there, and I would buy 20 to 30 long boxes from him every single time, take it back to my garage, and I had an eBay store, and I was selling stuff on my eBay store. And one of the funny things was about half the boxes I bought on one or two of those trips all had Geek Street stickers. So I didn't know. I asked John Hill, and I'm like, "Hey, who's this Geek Street?" He's like, "Oh, some guy named Luis. You'll probably meet him someday."
So flashback, comic fan, when my dad, I got to have my dad on this podcast eventually to rehab some of these conversations because the channel's, kind of old and the content wasn't as good back then. I appreciate those who've stuck with us this long. But if you want to see Comic Pops on the channel again to talk about a little bit of our history, comment down below. Also, I'll remind you, it'll enter you to win this Invincible #1 Tyler Kirkham Omni-Man variant. Also, the podcast is available on SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and iTunes. If you don't have time to watch us, or if you don't pay for YouTube Red and have to play the video while you listen to us, my dad, when he really ventured into comic books the first time and he bought a store, the store plan was to travel to Washington with the inventory because he bought the collection from a store in New York, buy a dude who, by the way, got out of comics and is back in comics now over the last year. Shout out Random Stacks on Whatnot.
No one ever leaves.
Full circle.
Yeah.
Right? You leave comics and you come back eventually. You say goodbye, but it's not a long goodbye. It's just, we'll see you another time in the future. Well, my dad drove up this collection with the intentions to start a comic store in Washington State and then realized he didn't want to do that. So he started selling at shows and on eBay. And with the help of my mom, they printed out labels, and he came up with the name Geek Street Comics. So this entire collection, when he priced it, he put these stickers on the bags, that said Geek Street, and it said the price. So you, without knowing my dad or myself, were acquiring comics from John.
Yes.
Because my dad had sold comics to John at some point over the last decade. And you're like, what are all these Geek Street comics? Those were from my dad, and we didn't even know each other.
So one of the first big collections that I was actually buying from another local dealer who I ended up being very good friends with, yes, already one click away from Tom because I'm buying them from the guy that bought them from his dad.
That's right.
Yep.
So you were slinging these comics, and we met at a show. And I told you after we met, I'm like, oh, I got to get your phone number, dude. Because the thing is that John lived kind of far away.
Yeah.
You know, he's like an hour
John
plus
was like
drive.
50 miles south of where I was living. So I would drive down to where John Hill was and pick up all the comics and drive back. I find out that Tom lives like 8 miles away from me. I'm like, oh, I will totally bring comics to your place. Let's get some deals going. You know?
So I'm buying like stuff off eBay. I'm going in. I'm starting to really enjoy the acquisition of comics. This is before I'm selling or anything. Before I even figured out that, oh, if I buy savvy and I let stuff go at the right time, I can upgrade and, you know, start the hobby, you know, the gem mint style, you know, let the hobby fund itself kind of thing. Mint. And I was collecting Invincible at the time. Mm-hmm. So you put me in your phone. You probably made a note about me being interested in Invincible, like a freaking drug dealer puts their client's preferences, you know, in the notes.
It said Tommy Comics was actually what I put you into my phone. So I knew who you were.
So we would go have this experience at System of a Down concert.
Yep.
We go backstage, get some, you know, they had like a refrigerator. There was no like alcoholic beverages.
Right.
It was a bunch of like, you know, juice and soda, and we got to see Chavo from a distance. It was a really cool time.
Right.
But you would end up hitting me up within a week telling me, yo, I just acquired some Invincible stuff. And you blew my mind when you told me that you had a graded Invincible comic. And I knew what that was, but I didn't want it until now.
Right.
So what ended up happening? You started like hitting me up, coming over to my apartment.
Oh, yeah.
And this is what you would do. You would say, yo, I have a couple books. And I'm thinking you were going to bring like 3 or 4 books because I saw the picture. You want me to bring these over? And I'd be like, yeah. You bring them over. But you would never bring just 3 to 4 books.
Oh,
you
no.
always brought a short box.
Everything. Yes. I bring a lot of good stuff because a good seller, you're going to want to, well, I wanted to make package deals for you. Hey, Tom wants an $80 book, but I'm going to bring a whole short box and maybe we can add some extra. Here's some Silver Age you might like. Oh, I heard you like this guy too. How about this one? You know, I mean, this is well before he had the Plastic Man tattoo, but.
True. You know what I did have at the time? I had my Hellboy tattoo.
You did?
And one of the books that you brought in that short box blew my mind.
Was that the San Diego Comic-Con one?
I knew it existed, but I'd never seen it. And it's one thing to know, like you hear it, hearsay, like that. His first appearance is in a pamphlet that was given away at San Diego Comic-Con in 1993, was it? Well, this particular opportunity was not just getting Invincible books, but you had one of these in there and you shared the story about it, how you acquired a collection, you paid really good money for the collection, and you didn't know you had a really scarce, wanted collectible, and you figured it out by going through the price guide, pricing it, and finding out, no, this is actually Hellboy's first appearance.
Well, I bought the collection, and this is kind of the thing. So I got this collection. A dealer called me and said, hey, I know a guy who's got blah, blah, blah. So I went over and I paid, I don't know, a couple $1,000s for, 20, 30 long boxes, whatever the deal was. And I get the collection back to my house. Every single issue #1 is gone. None of these are complete runs. I've got 2 through 50, 2 through 80, 2 through 12, but the dude that sold me the collection took every single issue #1. So I've got a Sandman run, missing Sandman #1. I've got an Invincible run, missing Invincible. So I'm not happy.
This is like cherry picking is what we call this.
Yeah. Someone cherry picked all the #1s out of the collection, and I did not take the time to look, which is why right now, if a collection comes in, I look at every single book in that box. I have to know exactly what's in there because you'll have someone go, oh yeah, they're complete runs. No, they're not. You took every single #1 out of it. But I went and I did my research, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, New Teen Titans #2. That's a book I care about. That's San Diego Comic-Con #2. That's a book I care about. So I started finding what a lot of the important #2s, 3s, and 4s were, so I could make my money out of this. But I knew Tom was a big Hellboy fan, and immediately, and I'm like, well, I don't have the dime press 4, but here's the other one that people want.
And that's what started our friendship. You would acquire comics, I would buy comics from you, and over time, you would take on the sensei role with me because I would start venturing out and looking for collections myself. Like, how do I do this, Russ? And this is before Craigslist was saturated. Guys, this is over 10 years ago.
So I remember being at the Meridian Park show, and
Hold on, let's describe what Meridian Park is.
okay, so Meridian Park is a middle school, like, junior high, 7th, 8th grade, and there was a cafeteria show once every 3 months, and you would pay like $25 for a folding table, and it would basically be 15 or 20 comic book dealers that were all local guys. And as I always joked with you about, and the rest of the dealers, every dealer was just passing the same $100 bill around the room. We didn't have a lot of people coming in. You weren't making a lot of money.
This isn't during school hours, by the way.
It was a great way to network on a Sunday.
That's right.
To be able to go down on Sunday to Meridian Park and sell. But this guy had a mid-grade Hulk 181. And Tom's looking at getting a Hulk 181, and he comes over to me because he knows I'm, John Hill had told Tom, go talk to Russ. He'll help you with this one. Tom's like, what do you think? Is $500 a fair deal for this one? And I'm looking at it going, all right, it has the value stamp. It has this. We started going over the little basic things of like, if you don't really know, this is about fair, but always check for your value stamp. It's the number one thing with the Hulk 181. And Tom ended up pulling the trigger on a mid-grade Hulk 181.
Yeah, it ended up being like a 7.5. It was under $500. I mean, this is a while ago. That was a lot of money for that book back then. And that was one of the biggest purchases I made at the time. And what's also curious because of Meridian Park, and this is one of those things where I hope this story may help some of the newer members, because networking in this industry is what it's all about.
Absolutely.
And the only way you're going to network is by going to conventions and shows. And not every show is a commitment of like $500 for you to be able to go to San Diego.
Right.
And you have to pay for a plane ticket and parking and Uber and all this kind of stuff. No, there are shows all over the place. Literally, we're talking about an elementary school, middle school cafeteria room that was just, rented out for a day for dealers like us to go and, comic book deal. But my dad and I, we used to go to like malls, and there was just Everett Mall, 2 months ago?
Yeah.
I was just buying comics from the Everett Mall. They rented out all like the alleyways of the mall, like where you would typically walk down, just taken over by tables. You have to open that network up and go to where the comics are, meet the people, do right by them, and over time you just start networking. And I'm glad you mentioned Meridian Park, because aside from that being one of the first times I acquired a bigger book that made me uncomfortable, but I'm glad I bought it at the time, that was also where I would meet a guy named Jeff Itkin, the Golden Age Guru.